Hello, in this video, this last part of Chapter 2, we will be talking about accepting input from the user and converting data types between different data types. We will be continuing to use the ice cream example that was used in the previous videos for this chapter. If you don't have an up-to-date version of the ice cream code, you can download my version from the course website. Okay, an interactive program is a program that allows users to input some values. Most programs these days are interactive programs. It doesn't do anyone much good if all that our programs do is just spit out some text. We need to be able to input some sort of text. So for example, in our ice cream application that we're building, it's not very useful that it always tells us how many scoops the customer is getting. We might want to have a program that asks you to input how many scoops the customer would like. That would probably be a little bit more useful. When we're using text-based applications, one way that we can accept input from the user is using the readline method. The readline method is also part of the system.console class, just like the writeline method is. The readline method takes all of the characters entered by a user into the command prompt until the user presses enter, and then it saves all of those characters as a string variable. So if you're asking the user to input something else, like a number, like how many scoops of ice cream they want, then we have to convert that string into a number. So we're going to be learning how to do that in this video as well. First, let me show you how to implement the readline method in some code. So let's open up our ice cream application code. All right. So if you recall, we had declared a bunch of different variables here. We have a double to represent the price per scoop. We have an integer for the number of scoops. We have a Boolean, which is whether it's a big bowl of ice cream or not. And we have a constant double, which is a text. Let's go ahead and edit this line of code where we have initialized the number of scoops. So instead of just manually putting 3, this is what we call hard coding. If you ever hear a program talk about you shouldn't hard code any numbers in, that means typing in a specific number instead of using a variable or allowing input from the user. So here we have hard coded that we start with 3 scoops of ice cream. What might be more useful is to instead ask the user how many scoops of ice cream they want. So what we can do is instead of typing 3, we're going to use the readline method, okay? And we can use this method because we've specified that we're using the system.console class. If we hadn't specified this, then here we'd have to type system.console.readline. Okay? But since we're using the keyword using up at the top, we don't have to do that. Okay? The readline method does not require any input inside the parentheses. It's just readline, open, close parentheses. Now, if we try to compile this, we will likely get a syntax error. Let's try it. So the error that we get says, cannot implicitly convert type string to int. So if you ever see an error like this, you'll know that you have 2 different data types that are not compatible. Now, the reason that that is happening is because readline, when you use the readline method, it returns a string. Okay, so the result of running this method is a string. And so what we have tried to do here is assign a string to an integer variable, which doesn't make any sense. Okay. If this were a string, then we would not get that error anymore. However, if number scoops is a string variable instead of an integer, then we can't use it in numerical calculations. So down here, when we calculate the subtotal by taking a number and trying to multiply it by a string, then we'll get a different error. So what we can do is we can initially save the input from the user as a string, and then we can convert that string into an integer. So let's declare an integer num_scoops. Actually, let's keep this how we originally had it. Num_scoops is going to be the integer variable. The string variable we're going to call num_scoops string. Okay, so what I just did there was I declared a string variable, num_scoops string, and we're going to assign it the value of whatever the user inputs. Then we're going to define an integer variable, and we have to somehow take the number that we have saved as a string and convert it into an integer. For now, I'll leave my code like that, and let's go back to the slides, and I'll show you about converting strings to numbers. Here's an example from the textbook where they have used the convert.toDouble method. So take a look at that example if you haven't already when you read the textbook. But basically use the convert class, which contains several methods. So you can convert string to any of these different other types of, to any of these other data types. So when we want to convert a string to an integer, we use the convert.toInt32 method. If we were converting it to a double, we'd use convert.toDouble method. So those are the two convert methods that you're going to be using a lot in your programs this semester. Okay, in almost every program that you create from here on out, you're going to accept some text from a user, and if you want that to be a number, then you're going to have to convert it. So we're going to use these over and over, the convert.toInt32 and the convert.toDouble. Okay, so here, what we can do is assign this num_scoops integer variable a value of the result of converting to int 32. So that's capital T, capital I, 32. And then inside the parentheses, we put the string that we are converting to an integer. So the convert.toInt32 method takes one input. You always have to have one input, which is a string inside the parentheses, and it will convert it to an integer. So we could put a literal string like the number 3, and that would be converted to an integer with the value of 3. Or we can put a variable replacing the number. So we have a variable called num_scoops_string that is holding a numerical value in it because the user is going to input a number, and we want to convert that to an integer. So we've got the name of a string variable as our input to this convert.toInt32 method. The result of that is a number, which we are going to save to the int num_scoops variable. All right. So if we save this code and test it out, let's see what happens. I have once again forgotten to use the using namespace. Okay, the name convert. So this is the error we saw in the string video as well. The name convert does not exist in the current context. When you see an error that says the name whatever does not exist in the current context, that means that it can't find that method or class. And that can usually be fixed by typing at the top of your code the keyword using, followed by whatever namespace it's in. As I said before, most of these are from the system namespace. I hope that I'm remembering that right. But I'm just going to put at the top of this using system. And then I'm going to save, and try again to compile it to see if that fixes my error. Yes, it did. I have no more errors. I still have a warning that I have a variable I haven't used, but I have no syntax errors. So that should have compiled correctly, and now I can run the executable file. Now it looks like nothing is happening, but actually what's happening is it's waiting for me to input some value because we've specified that we're using that readline method inside of our code. So it's waiting for us to input something so it can save it to that string variable. So if I put 2 scoops and hit enter, then what the code does is it saves that as a string, and then it converts that string to an integer, and then it runs through the rest of the code. It uses that integer in this calculation for the subtotal. Here it says customer asked for 3 scoops because if you recall, we have some code in our program file that adds an extra scoop. So we might want to fix that so that this program makes a little more sense. And it asks, and it says have a big bowl of ice cream false because this only says true if it's more than 3 scoops. Let me go back to the code. All right, so that was a little bit confusing when we first ran our program because it was just waiting for us to input something and we didn't know what it wanted us to input. So what we can do is add a line before that where we can just ask the user to input something. Please input the number of scoops. All right, so if I save, file save, and go back and compile, and then run the code, please input the number of scoops. So now we can input 1, and it calculates the subtotal based on what, based on 2 scoops because we keep adding an extra scoop. Which, let's go ahead and fix that. I'm just going to clean up my code here and I'll explain what I'm doing. First, I'm going to change this comment to say ask the user how many scoops, and then convert that string to an integer. Okay. And then down here where it says customer asked for that many scoops, I'm actually going to change this variable num scoops to num scoops string. Okay, so instead of replacing this placeholder with the number of scoops, which we have increased by 1, I'm actually going to replace it with num scoops string, which was the string that we collected from the user at the very beginning. That still has, if the user inputs 2, num scoop string is always going to be 2 because we haven't done anything throughout the rest of this code to assign a different value to the variable called num scoop string. So all the way through the end of this program, num scoop string is always the value that the user input. Okay, whereas this other variable num scoops, which is an integer, we first got that by converting the user's string input, but then we did some other things to it, such as adding an extra scoop. Okay, so by this point in the programming code, num scoops string would still be 2, but num scoops would be 3 if the user input 2. Okay, so I'm just so this program makes more sense, I'm just going to add one more write line. Since we have customer asked for however many scoops they asked for, but we actually add an extra scoop behind the scene, I'm just going to make that clear when the user runs the program. We gave them an extra. Ha ha ha. Evil laugh. The user only asked for 1, but we gave them 2 and charged them for it. How rude. Okay, and I'm also going to, well, let's compile that first before I make any other changes, just to make sure it still works. Okay, seems like it worked. Please input the number of scoops. 1. Your subtotal is 250. Customer asked for 1 scoop. We gave them an extra. Have a big bowl of ice cream, false. Okay. Just because I'm tired of always seeing that warning error that we have declared a constant tax, or excuse me, a constant double called tax, and we never do anything with it, let's do some extra practice with arithmetic. And below the subtotal, let's create a new double variable called total. And that is going to be the subtotal plus the constant tax. Okay. Then down here, excuse me, just want to input the comments, calculate subtotal and total. And then we tell the user the subtotal and total. Okay, so we've told the user what their subtotal is. Let's also tell the user what their grand total is. And I'm going to use a placeholder again. This time I'm going to use the total variable as to replace the placeholder. All right, save. Pause if you need to catch up, and I'm assuming you're following along with me. Let's compile it. Nice. Now we have no errors at all, not even any warning variables. And if we run the application, how many scoops? 5 scoops. Our total is 750. Subtotal 750 after tax. Our total is 825. Customer asked for 5 scoops. We gave them an extra. Have a big bowl of ice cream? True. All right. So we've cleaned up our code a bit, and I've showed you how to collect a string input from the user and how to convert that to an integer. Now, if we wanted to convert that to a double, if this were a double, if this said double num scoops, then we would have to use convert dot to double instead of dot to int32. Those are the two converting from strings to numbers methods that we're going to be using a lot this semester. All right, now let me jump back to the slides. Okay, I'm not going to take time in this video to go over the parse method, but the parse method is an alternative to convert dot to int32 or convert dot to double. I'm just always in the habit of using the convert class method, so that's what I'm going to continue to do throughout this course. But parse is another method that you can use instead of the convert class methods. Okay, so the convert class methods and the parse method are used to convert a string to another type of data, such as a number. What about if we want to go the other way around? What if we have a number and we want to convert it to a string? And you are going to need to do that in some of the future homeworks and possibly even the exam. So you want to be able to convert both from string to number and also the other way around from number to string. And then in just a minute, I'm going to wrap up this video by talking about converting one type of number to another type of number. All right, so to convert a number or anything else to a string, we use the .toString method, and it is built into every variable. So every time you create, anytime you declare or initialize a variable, that variable already has built into it a toString method. So if you type that variable name dot toString, it will convert whatever that variable is, whether that variable was an integer, a double, Boolean, anything at all. It will convert it to a string. It will convert that value so that you can save it to a string variable. Okay. Now, I wanted to clarify because it doesn't change the variable itself to be a string variable. It just takes the value of that variable and converts it to a string in order to save it to a new and separate string variable. So let me show you what I mean by that by looking in the code. Okay, okay, so here, I had just added this. I shouldn't have added it. I'm going to delete this line where we tell the user what their total is, and I'm going to do this in a totally different way. Okay, so if we have a total variable, which we do, and it is a double, and we want to convert it to a string so that we can tell the user this is what your subtotal is, we can write the name of that variable dot toString with the parentheses. Okay. Now, I'm not done yet, so don't think this is the whole line. Some students, when they learn this, they get confused. They think that if they write just this, that they've taken a double variable and they've suddenly made it into a string variable. No, this does not mean that the total variable is now a string variable. Okay, this line is not complete. This is a method that you can use that returns a string variable, which then you can, or excuse me, it returns a string value. So this method returns a string value, and that value can then be assigned to a string variable. So we can declare it as string total string. Okay, so now we have a string variable that holds the value of the double, or of the total. Okay, so if our total is $6.25, we've now converted that to a string. All right, so then we could, in our writeLine method, actually, I'm going to do this in a different way. Sorry, I was just thinking. That's the beauty of watching these videos as I record them somewhat live. You're not watching live, but I'm not editing this. Okay, so we are going to, yes, indeed, use the writeLine method to do a similar thing as we've done for a subtotal. We're going to tell the user what their total is. But here, we're going to do your subtotal is, and then I'm going to introduce another concept, which is concatenation. So that's basically like adding strings together. You can have one string plus another string, and it will just jam those strings together into a single string. So what I've done here in this code is I've said, okay, we have a literal string, your subtotal is, and we're going to smush it together with this other string, which is the string version of the total. So if our total was 625, okay, we had that saved as a numerical value. Now we've converted it to a string and saved it in this variable called total string. So now we've got two strings. We're squishing them together with this plus sign, which you can do. You can always have a string plus another string, and it just sticks them together. So let's save that. Actually, I'm going to add another comment. Tell the user the total does, okay. Sorry, I'll just leave it at that. Tell the user the total. But what I want to say is that it does basically the same thing as we did here with the subtotal. Okay, so taking this literal string and using a placeholder for the subtotal, we're basically doing the same thing, but demonstrating different concepts. Here we've taken the total and converted it from a double to a string, and then used that string, concatenated that string with a literal string to tell the user what their total is. Sorry about that. So as you can see, in programming, there's often multiple ways to arrive at the same solution. You can build a program using different concepts of coding and come up with the same result. So I'm going to save that and pause if you need to catch up. Compile. It worked. Now we're going to run it. Please input the number of scoops, 2, please. Your total is 375. Your total is 450. The customer asked for 2 scoops. We gave them an extra. Have a big bowl of ice cream, false. Okay, so that was the demonstration of converting a variable to a string using the .toString method. So any variable you have, you just put the .toString. It's a method that's built into that variable itself, and then you can save that to a string variable. Okay, this ice cream app is looking pretty good. I just want to mention a few other concepts. Oh, we have one more thing to do in the ice cream application. Okay, so a little bit more on the .toString method. The .toString method can accept input inside of its parentheses, but it's optional. In the example I just showed you, I just did total.toString and then the opening and closing parentheses without anything on the inside, and that's fine. But you can optionally put some input inside of the parentheses, a format specifier and a precision specifier. And there are a number of these, and you can find them in the textbook what all the different options are. But essentially, you can specify, like if you want to include a certain number of decimal places, or if you want it to be in a certain format. You might have noticed last time we ran the ice cream application, it just rounded the 450 to 4.5 because we didn't specify that we wanted the string to be in a certain format. So it just did the simplest format possible. But if we wanted to actually convert that into a string that is formatted as currency, and you'll want to note this way to do it as currency specifically, I think this pops up on the midterm exam, then instead of leaving those parentheses empty in our toString method, we can put a C inside quotation marks inside the parentheses. And what that does is it tells C# to convert that variable to a string that is formatted as currency. Okay. This is the most common one that we're going to see. We're going to use it several times during the semester. Probably won't have any other assignments, exams, homework, project, or anything where you have to convert to a different format or precision. But I do want you to know that those are available and you can look them up as needed. But I do want you to remember that if you want to convert a number to a string that looks like dollars and cents, then inside of your toString methods parentheses, you're going to put quotation mark, C quotation mark. So let's do that in our ice cream application. So here, where we have converted our total to a string, inside of these parentheses, I'm going to put quotation, C quotation. Now if I save that, compile it, and execute it, please input the number of scoops 1. Now it has converted that number into a string that is formatted like money. Okay, and I just did that on the total. I hadn't done it on the subtotal, but we can do it on the subtotal as well. So up here, where we have subtotal, we can just type .toString. Don't get your parentheses confused. This is like an inside parentheses, and then this closing parenthesis belongs with the right line method. And we'll put a C inside quotation marks there. So you might notice that I did this in two different ways, and it's fine. It's up to what makes sense to you or kind of what your style of programming is. Down here, I explicitly assigned the result of converting total to a string to a string variable. Like I declared a new string variable called total string, and then I used that string in another statement. Here, I haven't created a new string variable. I've just said that I want this placeholder to be a string instead of the double that it was initially. Now, if that's going too fast, if that goes over your head, don't worry about it. We could have also done it the same way that we did here. We could have converted it to a string saved as a string variable, and then call on that string variable in our later statement. Let's save and run this one more time. Compiles and runs, and everything looks good. It's formatted nicely, dollars and cents. And we have incorporated a lot of different concepts into this ice cream example. So I hope it has been helpful for you. Slow it down, pause it, review it as many times as you need. And we'll go over some other examples in the review session to solidify practicing these concepts. But before I end this video, I just wanted to mention a couple of other things on the slides. I won't have any specific examples of code, but I just wanted to mention them. We've talked about converting strings to numbers, and we've talked about converting numbers to strings. If you want to convert one type of number to another type of number, so for example, you want to convert an integer to a double, or vice versa, you can do that as well. In some cases, when you're doing arithmetic, so if you have a double and you add it to an integer, C# will just choose a unifying type. In that case, it would say, well, if you're adding a double to an integer, I think that makes sense that we can just save the result as a double. So it implicitly or automatically converts it, okay, to the type with the higher precedence. Now, precedence means the data type that is more specific. So a double has a higher precedence than an integer because it allows more precision with more decimal places. So an implicit caste is what happens when you have an integer value and you want to assign that value to a double variable. So if you have something with a lower precedence that you want to assign to a higher precedence, C# can do that automatically. So if you have a variable called a double, which is a double variable, and you have a variable called an int, which is an int variable, you can do code that looks like this, where you can just assign the value of the integer to a double variable. But you can't do it the other way around. You can only go from lower to higher precedence. So if you have a double that you actually now want to save as an integer, you have to put the data type in parentheses right before the double. So here we have an integer variable. We want to assign an integer value to it, but we're giving it a double value. So we have to explicitly say, well, here's a double. I actually want it saved as an integer, and then it gets assigned to the integer variable. Last thing, enumerations. It's talked about in the textbook. I hope you read about them. It can be useful in some cases. This course just covers so much that I have to cut some stuff out. We are not going to be talking about enumerations in this course, but keep a bookmark in there. So after this course is over and you want to learn more about programming, that's one of those things you can go back and learn more about. All right, we are finally through with all of the videos for Chapter 2. Variables and data types. It's a lot of material, I know, and a lot of practice. Please do the best you can on this chapter, especially this chapter. Do as much practice as you can. Master these concepts of working with string variables, numerical variables, converting them back and forth to each other. This is the basis. Every single other program and chapter we talk about for the rest of the semester will use variables. So you really need to understand them. So go ahead and get some more practice done.